Because the mother, in order to support or survive the family, was very often with other people. That's very simple. Can we see that? Yeah. And that she put a lot of interest or a lot of energy, Leo, into her kind of self-actualization, Leo, which was probably a very extraordinary or a not typical way of making money or making a career in terms of self-actualization. Yeah? And that the mother had probably a very strong sense of art. Could be. Yeah? And probably about, now it could come up to painting, but it could also be music or, how do you call, art on the stage, where she's seen, where she's recognized. A public figure, eventually, because in the seventh house, we need the audience. That could have been.
She's very shy.
She's very shy?
Very shy.
Okay,
not at all.
What did she do?
Outgoing.
Painting or
She's done...
musician?
No.
It must have been something very special. Something like what we...
No. She was, she worked for college doing student loans.
Scorpio. Money of it. A beauty shop. Oh, see, here we have it. On the one hand, college, which is the ninth house moon, and a beauty shop, which is, of course, this one.
She made other people look special.
Uh-huh. Oh, great. Great.
Look, appearances.
So it isn't there.
Yeah. So, therefore, she was very busy. Yeah? And very often not available.
Yeah.
Could she have also spent a lot of time with all those quote-unquote stepfathers? Because that's the distance, like been away with carousing with the boyfriend or just going...
Well,
something like that.
She ended up spending a lot of time on her relationships because they were always dysfunctional.
Uranus?
And she tended to get married in order to support her family. But she had a really strong value system, and if she was aggressive about anything, it was values. It was being a proper person. She dated very properly. There was no hanky-panky in our house. There were no men ever living in our house. Or very,
Did she spend time away from you because of that? Because of this relationship? Emotionally?
Emotionally, in the house, emotionally, she was either fighting with
Mark?
the husband or depressed and withdrawn.
Yeah.
But I want to say something about the jealousy thing that you brought up. Never.
Never? So you were...
She worships me and I worship her.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's... Oh, okay. See, this is very much the seventh house. It's giving and receiving, that both were supporting their need of recognition, yeah, or being very special. No? Good. Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. My batteries are
A lot of heartbreak for your mother?
I'm sorry?
A lot of heartbreak for your mother.
Yeah. She's been through a lot of shit.
Yeah.
Where do you see that? Venus square.
Venus square. Venus square Mars? Oh, see, I see it in Venus Uranus.
Yeah.
Breaking the heart. Venus is the heart chakra. No?
Are you and your mother very attached to each other, almost even like possessive of each other?
No, not really possessive, but emotionally dependent a little bit.
Which goes back to unresolved dynamics from early childhood. Which goes back to her...
Helped her grow up too.
And it probably goes back to her own story as a child. Yeah? With a mother that was not very available for her.
Right.
Yes.
It's a very intense
So-
relationship together, right?
Me and my mother?
Yeah.
I guess.
I'm just thinking of the moon as Scorpio. That's
The fact that she has Uranus conjunct Venus in the 7th house and with those aspects, right now our lens of focus is her mother and he's telling us about her. Yet, if we focus on her, that's not necessarily the case. And Uranus, Venus could say a lot about erratic relationships, right? but that's not her case.
Erotic relationship?
No, erratic, like erratic.
Oh, erratic. Okay.
Because of Uranus,
Yeah.
right?
See, this is what this whole exercise in this afternoon is about, that we see early childhood imprint, that we learn how the archetypes do really more or less reflect what we, see repeated, where we learn about it, but also then to see how that imprint defined the emotional self-image in this life.
So would the Venus conjunct Uranus mean that she would also want to do it differently from what she saw as a child?
In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. Because Uranus is so heavily emphasized, it's always simultaneously both. Yeah? And i.e., like what I see in this chart is that her mother, the grandmother, the mother of the mother, that there is some abusive story or rejection story or something unhealed in the family system. That the mother, her mother, Donna's mother, has been more or less taken in or been suffering from when your mother was a child. And that somehow affected her mothership when you were the child. That on the one hand, she wanted to break free from this pattern and wanted to almost spoil you. Leo, spoiling. Yeah?
Can you show where the
Hold on, let me first finish the thought. And to spoil you, but on the other hand, the one thing was not healed yet. So it was still there. This is like, imagine, I come from a very abusive relationship that I had last year. And I'm ready now for going into a new relationship. But if I don't have healed my heart from the old relationship, I can't be willing to open my heart. You know what I mean? But there's still this spark of pain in my heart. You know what I mean? So I try to spoil, do whatever, but sometimes just this comes. These were the moments when she was emotionally just shutting down. Yeah? More or less totally not available or depressive or bitter is the wrong word, but you know what I mean? This kind of very deep, this kind of beaten. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And that goes back, that's the family history that you have inherited, Scorpio, from the causative factor of your grandmother, of an unresolved shock in your family history. I'm slipping once again into this family sculpturing thing.
Okay, now two of us want to know where the...
Okay.
Are you my child?
I think you're going to have to feel that with the child.
No, the ninth house very often in traditional astrology is grandparents. Very often. But what I very often do to understand the background story of the mother, I flip the chart.
For the mother of the mother.
Now, I make the fourth house cusp being the ascendant of your mother. Okay? Then it would, do you know what I mean? So now I just pretend, okay, this is the chart of your mother. This for the Geminis or Mercury people under, she will not have a Taurus rising. It has nothing to do with that. But it shows that the ruler of her ascendant, because not, can you follow what I'm doing?
Mother's ascendant.
The mother's ascendant's ruler is in the fourth house again. Which is the mother of the mother. The mother of the mother. Got it? Yeah? So I see there's some unresolved traumas from the grandmother's side that had to do with the early childhood and physical that your mother had experienced. Now I look into this house cusp, which becomes Cancer. Yeah? I pretend this is your mother's chart. And I look into Cancer house cusp. That would be the grandmother. The mother is your mother. So I look for its ruler, which is Neptune. It's Moon in Scorpio conjuncting Neptune. Hello? There must have been a dramatic, dynamic shock, something. Yeah? For the grandmother, where she had been subjected or victimized or something. Yeah? That's where the story comes from. That's why I love family sculpturing so much, because we could work now in a group workshop. We could replace these people through representatives, and we would see where the flow of love in the family history got shocked and blocked. 6 signs. Yeah? That your mother as a child had energetically, Moon in Scorpio, inherited in her emotional aura body. And even though, because your mom was a strong survivor, Taurus rising, yeah, she wanted to break free, ruler of that in the fourth house conjuncting Uranus, with all her strength, doing her own thing. The art as a as a way to channel this energy, to creatively change it. Keep in mind, Scorpio makes a natural square to Leo. Very often, art, if it's an expressive kind of art, Leo, goes back that within the emotional body we experience compression, which is Scorpio. Everything creative on our planet or in our thing has a built-up of intensity of emotions to at a certain point metamorphosis and create something. Just think of the simple fact of how an orgasm feels. Yeah? Built up, built up, built up, built up, release. Yeah? Release can create baby. So that's, you know what I mean? So your mom tried according to her early childhood traumas, because the mother maybe was not available. Maybe she died. Maybe there was a stepmother. Maybe there was whatever reason. We don't know it. But it was something that your mom, deep in her heart, was still suffering and yet trying to break free. That is the reason for this. Yeah? Make sense? In terms of, I'm not going into evolutionary astrology. We're just looking into family history. Yeah? And I like that so much because Carl Gustav Jung was always talking about the generations before us. And there's more truth than we right now in our anti-family attitudes, yeah, I can think of. Yeah? So that's where I got it from.
So Uli, along those lines, if Donna cuts the chain of this specific pattern,
yes,
she's going to release the family chain generation
exactly.
of that pattern.
The repetitive story of that pattern. That's so true.
So
yes.
she actually can do that by changing and shifting this,
yeah.
by working on that.
Yeah.
And future generations won't be carrying
no.
that. So the responsibility that each person actually, we as persons have, is very, very strong. Each individual has a strong responsibility, not for future generations only, but to liberate the past generations.
That's why I think it's so important before people marry, yeah, they should have cleansed and purged the dynamics of their childhood and, you know, the generations before. You know what I mean? Because if it's not cleansed, and keep in mind most people get married in our times was latest by the first Saturn return. Saturn return. When they all of a sudden feel like, oh, I'm running out of time, I need security, yes, I do it like my parents, da-da-da-da-da. Yeah? And then very often the subconscious, think of what I've been talking about, miscarriage and abortion, it's in the heart. We're not consciously knowing about it, but we carry it within it until we make an emotional change of the energy. And you only if in a family a secret or a shock or a pain has not been re-embraced in the principle of love. That's the whole clue. There's nothing wrong. Yeah? We all screw up. We all make mistakes. Yeah? But let's say a typical example, in the family, let's say the grandfather's brother lived a gay life. And therefore he was cut off the family system. No one was allowed to talk about them. In the heart, it's not an act of love. It's a moralistic, stupid, patriarchal, stupid thing. It would not be surprising that like one generation or two generations later, one child senses this energy subconsciously and starts to identify with this grandfather and lives a gay life. Could be. Even though maybe not being really gay. Yeah? And then if we combine that with Jeff's evolutionary astrology, that's mind-blowing, because maybe even this guy is the grandfather. You know what I mean? Then we go like, oops. Could be. But, you know, I guess you need psychic abilities to then make really good statements about it.
Did you know your grandmother?
Oh, yeah.
Was she really creative person?
Yeah.
It just feels like being a patriarch, women that didn't get to access their individuality has been passed on, and you know, this looks like someone who really wants to break that pattern.
Yeah. And the pattern has something to do with a taboo theme. Taboo. Taboos is Scorpio. Yeah. Taboo theme in the family. Keep in mind it was Mormon. Yeah. Where?
I was the one.
Oh, you were the Mormon. The grandmother wasn't? No?
No family member was.
Oh, okay.
I thought you said your mother was.
She was initially because she got involved in the church when we first moved to this town, but she immediately dropped away. She didn't fit in.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so she never took it on.
Lady in the Mormon church like it. So I liked it. So I stayed on for years by myself.
So is that the Cancer being also on the 6th house cusp, looking at the moon as the ruler down here, and that's the house, as T4 says, of mentoring? That, of mentoring, that one of the ways you found mentoring was through a church or a religious experience?
Yeah, initially, yeah, that's why I stayed on in the church. Provided until I was 13,
Yeah.
and I stopped that.
Kind
Went on
of
to
bouncing into something new right now.
What, am I wrong, Julie?
No, no.
Oh.
I'm just fighting with if I shall open the next little box or if I shall not. You know.
Oh, open the boxes.
I don't want to say that it's true because I don't see the whole chart. Yeah. But let's just be like a little playful, if I may.
Can I also, just before you say that, remember when she said her mother ran a beauty shop? And it made other people feel special? Is that like a projection of her inner... Because she said her mother was shy. Is that a projection of her inner need to feel special? Because is seventh house projection?
It's very much projecting
on other
needs.
people.
Yeah,
Exactly.
but it's also, we see the mother had a Taurus, Venus, in, she has a strong sense for physical beauty, yeah, and physical appearance of beauty, which goes back to the incarnations that she, Donna, and her mother had in Egypt. In Egypt, when certain souls came to Egypt, the original population living in Egypt were from these kind of souls that had a link to Atlantis, were considered as being ugly. Gods were considered to be beautiful. You know? So there was a lot of surgeries done in Egypt, beauty temples, as a service to God. Huh?
They do those today.
Today, again, of course, this is Neo Atlantis here in the U.S.
But that Mars square Venus at the same time also is, there's a lot of sexual energy that
Thank you.
projected out. I mean, you are pretty, Donna. You are so pretty, and you're one of these women that I've always envied because you put the goddess on. That's sort of that Venus conjunct. You're just so pretty with that you are able to almost put it on like a mask, although you can see it also comes from within. And but that Mars Venus, it isn't just the Venus Uranus that would be sort of detaching partially from itself, but that Mars ignites it.
Yes.
And inflames it.
Yes.
So do you get a lot of attention sometimes that you're surprised to get too? Male sexual attention, meaning?
Yeah. See, the thing is, okay, yeah.
Could the Mars-Venus connection also show a direction towards androgyny or the union of masculine and feminine?
Yes, could be, very much. But on the other hand, we see that the moon, a water planet, being in a water sign, conjuncting a water planet. Which is the Trinity. Water. Moon, Cancer, Pisces, Scorpio. Yeah? Yes, there is a tendency of androgyny. Yeah? But on the other hand, this is purely woman.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah?
But
I feel androgynous.
Of course, feeling is Venus.
I feel real girly.
Yeah. Girly, young,
But you
you know.
projected seventh house.
Maybe because the descendant is in Cancer, right? Today, Jeffrey said that the ascendant was our instinctual...
Yeah, that's the persona.
It's how we project. So
Yeah.
Cancer being on the descendant could probably make her project or show herself very feminine, right?
Yes, on the one hand, but we also have to distinguish between my inner emotional self-image or my emotional nature and how I feel. Yeah? My inner relatedness. And there's both. Once again, we've been talking about the mother. Yeah? On the one hand, college. On the other hand, beauty, thing. On the one hand, shy. On the other hand, that's both. There's both in her.
Can I say, Jeffrey said today she said the feminine principle he said was the water. And
That's right.
then, because he said it was the feminine principle, and I think you said afterwards, well, the earth is also...
Feminine, because of yin.
Is it also the, you know what I mean?
I ask him, but he makes his little emphasis with the, and so I'm sometimes lost by it.
Okay, but would an earth triad be just as much feminine principle?
Yeah.
Okay, that's all I know.
Different expression.
But it's different. Yeah, Earth is also very much like emotions, but like it manifested different.
Right.
This is a big secret about Capricorn. Capricorn is in our patriarchal astrology always defined as being a masculine sign. Bullshit. Capricorn itself is bisexual. When you have planets in Capricorn or 10th house, You're dealing with a bisexual archetype, i.e. androgynous archetype. Yeah? But because of patriarchal overlay, or Capricorn, one is suppressed according to the social expectation towards your gender. Make sense?
Yeah.
Shall I repeat that again? Make sense? Did you get it right now? Was it a light bulb?
No, I got something else.
Oh, here we go.
Sorry.
I've got Mars in Capricorn in the 10th house. Yeah? This is the expectation. Yes, you have to be this brave soldier kind of man. But the inner relationship is very female, even with a Mars there. Yeah? But most of the guys out there with Mars in Capricorn would never, ever admit to that. Because of what? Capricorn, social judgment. You know? Keep in mind, Capricorn Cancer is the axis of emotional security. You know? Who wants to live as an outcast? Make sense? So very often this one other part becomes suppressed. You know? Make sense? Okay. So may I become playful? Just one time? I don't see the whole chart. Just let's do it as a little, like, kind of, you know, playfulness. But according to that, the natal chart is the unchangeable reflection of the past, as the teacher of Yogananda stated it. And it's also true. Especially when you go like into hypnotherapy and you make like past life regression, and you are able to read a chart, whatever pictures you will see, they will be symbolized in the chart. Stunning, almost threatening. Yeah? Could give you an example, but we're running out of time. Interesting to me, just as an observer, is that as a young child, she was like in the Mormon church and even stayed there. Yeah? That the mother was very shy. But on the other hand, we get all this sexual energy in this chart. Yeah, I mean there are 2 planets in Scorpio. Yeah, just looking onto that, not more. There's a Mars in Taurus. Yeah, there's Cancer on the 6th house cusp, which is not very sexual, by the way, but its ruler is in Scorpio. There is the symbol, what we said about the mother, that there was, you said, dysfunctional relationships. On the one hand, she was so much longing for a sustaining relationship in order to survive the family. On the other hand, she attracted people, you know, or were in relationship with others, that whenever it became like cozy and warm, Venus-like, detachment happened, or unresolved issues came up, from her side or from the guy's side. You know? Probably. There was also this shyness, and what you emphasized too much, that the mother always took care that the house stayed clean. Can you remember that she said it? That no guys would go in and out. Proper is the word.
Proper, yeah.
No? So there's somehow maybe a need of purification, of purging of something.
Is that the moon Neptune? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, Neptune was, you know, pure. If I would look onto this symbolism coming from previous lives, of course Scorpio being the archetype of sexuality, Taurus being the archetype of sexuality and survival, you know, Mars being, of course, man or sex. Yeah? The ruler of that is in the 7th house. Yeah? Leo makes itself beautiful and stunning. Yeah? And with Uranus in the 7th house to get attraction. Yeah? But not only from one, because Uranus is an archetype of groups or strangers. Yeah? And this is making a square to Moon Neptune. Yeah? And keep in mind, Cancer is on the 6th house cusp with its ruler in Scorpio. That maybe a part within that soul tries to purge from previous incarnations where the survival was only guaranteed by being a prostitute. Yep.
Like group sex.
Group sex, maybe, but probably not, because this is more like a one-to-one situation. But different strangers to make... I always get this picture. Did you read the book, The Man Who Fell in Love with the Moon? No? Like this kind of western village where the saloon is, yeah? Run by a very tough woman. She's self-employed. Yeah? There's alcohol, yeah? All of that. But a part, like an extra money income, is like to somehow get the man interested in her extraordinary beauty. Yeah? These kind of whatever soldiers or cowboys, yeah? and to take, okay, before you get into my room and we make love, you wash. You take a shower. You know what I mean? Am I on the trip? You know, I'm not saying anything, but it's just like, to me, this is also a symbolism that there has been sexuality used for somehow surviving in a kind of a new land. New, Uranus, land, Taurus. Yeah? As settlers, as immigrants, so to speak. Yeah? And maybe the woman, because the husband died, you know, she inherited money, built up a saloon, yeah, with alcohol, with other girls that were like her children. She gave little advices. Hey, dress like this. I guess the blue dress would be hot for Mr. Baker, who comes from his ranch tonight. You know, getting in this fantasy.
Is it mom's past life?
Or yours, because we're still looking at your charts. But if it was mom's or your past life, you've been together.
But there's something really interesting in there, too, about the Venus-Neptune, because I've just become aware of this in some of the inner ritual work I've been doing, is that the Venus being the lower octave of Neptune, and then taking the 3 planets of the lower and higher octaves, that the lower octave one is the energy you take to the higher octave, which is the altar upon which you use the energy of the lower to become a conscious co-creator with God.
Exactly.
And so in that, in the 9th, conjunct the moon in this cycle of this life, there is also all of this other stuff. You know, there's like this sacrificial of the feminine within any Christian church. I mean, that's so that actually goes on. But there is such a burgeoning fullness, such a wonderful inner sense of union that you experience through your religion. But it's a balance with you as to whether, I'm not saying this very well, as to how much your feminine is sacrificed on the altar of a patriarchal religion, but at the same time coming behind it, you have the material to find real wholeness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's both. It's both there. And it goes back, we could even dive further back in time just by that symbolism. Then we surely end in Egypt. Yeah? I mean, this is very easy to see. Taurus Mars, you know.
Lake, right?
But it also goes back to times and incarnations where the female principle was considered to be holy via the expansion, 9th house, of its female sexual energy. Via, and it sounds strange, via being able to make sex or to make love in a way that the woman was in a state of trance, vibration. And by the trance vibration, via embracing her inner emotional nature, being in a divine vibration of being a healer, Neptune, and embracing one man, not literally, but one man after the other. And because, do you know this Tibetan technique, Tenglen? Where when you get yourself in a more or less like healing vibration, and you then connect with someone else via breath or embracing, you take the karma of the other one into you and heal it while you are in the divine vibration. That's like a spiritual vacuum cleaner. Got it? Yeah?
Feels a little masochistic though, doesn't it?
No, because the intention is she was, while that, in a total state of alignment with the goddess. Yeah? Helping the kids of God to purify. Yeah? So that goes back to holy techniques of sexual tantra. Yeah? That then, what you said, in patriarchal religions became subjected to, you need to avoid that, Neptune. So she had very many lifetimes where she either ended up as a prostitute in the one or the other fashion, and then afterwards trying to atone for that ability via monasteries. Yeah? Makes sense? As an archetype? Yeah? But in essence it goes back to, I'm spacing out, I'm sorry, in essence it goes back to the ability that she is a sexual healer. Yeah? Makes sense? To be able to go very, very fast in a state of holy vibration via the emotional, physical body. And then embracing the other one and making him vibrate in her way. Yeah? And taking in and purging it. Imagine you would close the eyes and within you would be pure light. Yeah? Or imagine a blue sky when a cloud comes in. and the cloud just fades away. That's what I mean, on an energetic level. You know, got it? Am I spacing out? No? Makes sense? Okay.
What was that Tibetan thing called?
Tenglan.
Kunlun?
Tenglan. I don't know how you say it in English, but...
And it goes both ways. I mean, women can heal men, men can heal women.
Exactly. It was not only that women did it, but it's very often men, but most of the men that did it were already in a state of being androgynous. They were medicine men or medicine women. They were naturally bisexual for that because yin and yang was balanced. Got it again? No? Hold on.
And then another thing too, there would be the sexual energy, but then also to not be sexual at all and to have, I'm sure that you'd have a lot of other creative energies and abilities, and to integrate them, like having all these abilities to sustain you and not being looked at as a sexual, I mean...
Yeah. But see, the sexual in those times was was like a lawyer in our times. It was socially the highest respect. Yeah? Because it was considered, caused by the sensual and emotional perception, how good it feels. Yeah? In a natural way, not in this, yeah, fuck me, yeah, kind of attitude. Because it felt so good, it was considered to be divine. Yeah? And so there was nothing wrong. Did you read the book of Hermann Hesse, Siddhartha? Yeah? Where he goes to this courtesan that teaches him how to make love. And she was considered to be like, she was rich. She was like living prosperity. You remember? And she was teaching him all the, you know, moods and how to deal with a woman as considered being a holy goddess. Yeah? That's very much the archetype that I'm hitting at. I'm not talking about the cheap prostitute somewhere in the corner. Yeah? But at a certain point she was subjected to that.
And I just wanted to, I think that there would also be a lot of other creative, artistic talents besides that.
Totally.
That she could sustain herself on, too.
Yeah. But see, the thing is, once again, doing that was not considered to be something bad. No? But it became more and more distorted, caused by what you said, patriarchal religions. No? Even to the fact to be a prostitute and giving up her children.
So that way it's the oldest profession from Egypt that's the root of prostitution?
No, it's even older. See, prostitution, as we know this word, is like rooted in a total different archetype. Total different archetype. But from my point of view, actually, from my point of view, the abuse started, but it was sexuality and priest and healing was very often combined in one person. Yeah?
So the distortion of that divine sexual healing is where the prostitution came in.
Yes. Because of mankind, in patriarchal terms, defined everything which is physical, emotional, sensual, and natural, being bad and needs to be suppressed.
Right.
So on the one hand, they created the image that the woman or the human being has to be pure, but on the other hand, like the Vatican itself, having, you know, running her own houses and making money from that. There's a lot of things like this. Plus the loss of children. The children were taken away very often. Yeah? Uranus conjuncting Venus in Leo. That's the 4th house. This is one of the unreal shock. And I guess like the grandmother that might have experienced something like that. Could be.
Well, it looks like a lot of people getting ready to leave.
Yeah, we leave. I'm done.
Just maybe some resolve.
One other thing I wanted to ask.
Yeah.
In terms of the family, I mean, this is a personal issue, but it's up with the Venus square the moon. You can see that through the family, it seems like there's a contradiction within the psyche about the erotic versus the nurturing part of the feminine, and that you can't resolve putting those two together, maybe deep in the psyche.
Yeah. And from my point of view, well, then we have to look into the whole resolution thing. But sometimes just acknowledging this fact would be helpful. You know what I mean? Yeah? Just to say, yeah, okay, fine. Could be.
When it's Scorpio.
And see, I don't know the whole chart, but I guess that probably Pluto itself would be probably in the 8th house. And probably in Virgo. Is that right?
Yeah.
Doesn't that look like sex from, you know, work, sex? Yeah? And what happened like in Virgo H, we're talking now about Virgo, the sub-H of Piscean, yeah? How were women, you know, the family maybe was poor, struggling for survival in the family. Wasn't it usual or possible that one child was sent out to have sex with strangers to support the family? Yeah? Not? Yes?
Sure.
And does that not bring a certain detachment from the natural needs, and afterwards feeling so ugly and dirty because now the motivation was not right anymore? I mean, the motivation to help the family is perfect. But what actually happened in terms of a soul that has deep memories of natural sexuality, and all of a sudden sleeping with a greasy kind of soldier in the Middle Ages in Belgium is not funny. Yeah? So afterwards there's a need to atone for that because these women were told they are the temptation. Yeah? So they atoned for being the victim. Make sense? Yeah? And does that not create a certain dynamic of codependency in relationships? Yeah? At a certain point. In order, now we come to this Pluto polarity point, according to Jeff. Pluto polarity point in the second house in Pisces. To learn to relate to herself and to heal her inner relationship to herself and her sexual thing. To become whole again. Self-sustained again. That's the soul intention. And I don't know where the notes are, but you probably will see the same story there again.
I just have to add, by transit right now, you have Vesta retrograde conjunct Uranus Venus, and Mars in Scorpio is going to go retrograde up here. And so that would really be about, you know, Vesta's reclaiming your original self before taking on all that sexual karma, guilt. And I don't use Vesta a lot, but that seems really important for you.
Which is why you're skaked out on the whiteboard right now.
Okay. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Good. Thank you.
We're going to today starting with Virgo. Before we do that, I want to know if you have any questions from any of the preceding material that we've already discussed.
Can't remember.
Can't remember. Okay. Anybody? No questions? Okay, so now we're going to go into a detailed discussion of Virgo. And we're going to spend some time on this because it's a very complicated archetype with respect to the conditioning overlay of what we can call a patriarchy and the religions. Now the first thing to remember is that we've already come from Aries through Leo now, meaning we began a brand new evolutionary journey at Aries. There's been a progressive process of self-discovery, which have come through value associations equaling meaning for life, ideas, which are the ideational system, the mental thoughts, the information that the soul is going to bring into itself to reflect the very purpose for the current life. That's a way of communicating itself. This has now come through the fourth house, and of course now the formation of the egocentric structure, which is generated in self-image, an emotional body, a way to feel secure with this, a way to give personal form to the current purpose, which is now creatively actualized through the Leonian archetype. And since we've come to Leo, we've come to the point where the subjective consciousness has now reached a state of maximum development. From Aries to Leo, pure subjectivity. Meaning there's no objective awareness yet. And as a result, the soul at this point is literally full of itself. And this is why the words selfish and narcissistic and so forth apply. But from the point of view of Leo, necessarily so. So now we're going to begin the necessary process of expanding this subjective consciousness. And this is what one of the deepest meanings of the Virgo sixth house archetype is about. It's what's called a transitional archetype. Transitional from the point of view of setting in motion for the first time. The necessity of developing an objective awareness, meaning the awareness of others, the awareness of the world, the awareness of the cosmos. Because there clearly has to be an adjustment. If everybody on this planet was just walking around in an Elionian consciousness, you'd probably have a rather dysfunctional planet. Yes? I'm the best, I'm the best, I'm the best. You serve me, you serve, and they're all doing that to one another. Be pretty dysfunctional, wouldn't it? So, clearly we have to have a necessary adjustment. And that's where Virgo comes in. And because one of the essential intentions of Virgo, sixth house, is to create this adjustment in the way that the adjustment initially manifests. There's an awareness within. It's like Leo, you can look at it on a symbolic level as a pyramid. And on the Leonian, from the Leonian view, the individual sitting on top of this pyramid. When we go to Virgo, we're going to invert the pyramid in such a way that the pyramid is now standing on the person. That's how extreme the adjustment is. You see? The intention of which is to generate a necessary humility to the ego. That in fact it's not the source of the universe. That there are in fact larger forces than itself. This initial awareness occurs in this archetype. And because the awareness is so shocking from the point of view of Leo, echoing extremity. And this is why we have the reverse symbolism. You see my point? Remember that Leo is fixed. And to change anything that's intrinsically fixed requires a relatively extreme/intense phenomenon. Sort of like shocking the consciousness. You know, if I get slapped, I tend to pay attention. You know my point? Virgo is a slap in the face from the point of view of Leo. From the point of view of Virgo, it says, give it to me. Well, that's right, the Virgo archetype's emphasized in this class, isn't it? So we have to be, I'll try to be a little bit more delicate. Finally, honesty. No. Because, see, one of the obvious applications of sixth house Virgo is a necessity of providing service on behalf of the whole or community that one is living within. Every human person has a function relative to the whole, and part of that function is a work function, so that the whole can be sustained. So this is part of the, of course, the triad of Capricorn, Taurus, Virgo. This is your triad that correlates with integrating oneself into the world with a work to do, which is on behalf of one's community. And then when you put this in the context of monogamous families and all this that the patriarchy creates, it also has a practical consequence of taking care of one's children, marriage partner, and so on. So it is a necessary thing, obviously. This is why we have the connection back to Taurus, resources we have to sustain ourselves. Part of that sustainment being a work function. So we can make money. Second house. So part of this initial awareness is occurring here in Virgo. You see? This is one of the original awarenesses of this fact. And what we're now talking about is the individual not being able to live just for itself. Leo is now aware that it has to also fulfill the needs of the larger community that it's existing within. And then if we keep in mind the natural polarities in this case Pisces, Neptune, 12th house, clearly this is the ultimate archetype of that which we can call the entire cosmos, the universal, God itself, or goddess. So the point here is that that kind of awareness from the point of view of Virgo, and the natural zodiac, is for most, a very deep unconscious awareness, and yet at the same time that unconscious awareness creates the effect in the total consciousness that is something much larger than itself. Yes? It's sort of like going outside and realizing how small one is as measured against the totality called the sky. That's how reality is perceived from the point of view of Virgo. The actual perception of. So that once you have that kind of perception, then clearly the consequence of the ego is to feel small / humiliated. Do you see how this is working on an adjustment level? So this is one of its necessary functions. Now, the deepest complication of Virgo, I mean, think of it. I mean, why do you read in your traditional books that, you've all read the happy descriptions of self-analysis, self-criticism, awareness of lack, and so on and so forth, the whole quest for perfection, whatever that may be. And so the bottom line comes in, where is this coming from? What's the cause of it? Our first way of explaining it, measuring ourselves against the sky, making necessary humility, we seem small, of itself, does not demand that we become excessively critical towards ourselves. You see my point? It can't be just a simple, gentle, natural awareness of what needs to be adjusted. That excessive self-criticism in such a way that we literally become our own worst enemy. So then there has to be some other cause to explain why that's the current effect of Virgo. That would not be the effect of Virgo in natural law. So there has to be some sort of historical cause. And this is where we get into this patriarchal transition business. Because as the patriarchy began to take over, they began literally inventing religions. Literally inventing. I mean, it had things that had nothing to do with what is naturally true and not true. And an example of that is the projection of the so-called perfect patriarchal God. Again, ask yourself one Piscean question, Pisces logic. How can a perfect anything create an imperfect anything? It is not possible. So you see right away in this men's invention of the perfect God. And that then also dovetailing with all kinds of moral creations relative to this perfect male God. And then within that, all the should-bes. Right conduct, right behavior, da-da-da-da-da-da. Sex is only supposed to be procreational. You see my point? The bottom line here, keeping in mind again, Virgo's connected to Capricorn. And remember we told you before, this patriarchal transition began in the Capricorn sub-age of the Cancer age. Yes? So, and the bottom line is that we can reflect this through a really simple story, which is called the Garden of Eden myth. And if you examine the nature of this darn thing, what you literally have. The myth itself is the causative factor for the pathology we call masochism and sadism. Why? Woman in this myth is presented as representing the temptation that man gave into, which has then affected man's spiritual development. Do you understand? Whereas woman is represented as, via the temptation, as representing the world of the senses, meaning sexuality. And man in the myth is represented as the purity of spirituality. And by giving in to the temptation, he has then managed to effect his own fall from grace. Yes? And so as a result of this, the woman is made to feel guilty by the sheer fact of her beingness, which according to the myth is limited to sensuality. And that being the temptation that serves as man's spiritual downfall. So she's made to feel guilty just for who she is. At the same time, the man feels just as guilty. Why? He gave in to the temptation. So in both cases, man-woman guilt. Now, the difference is that the woman is made to atone for the guilt. Why? She's the one representing the temptation. Man is going to have anger linked with the guilt because he gave in to the temptation, whereas woman's the cause. So right away we see the simultaneous invention of superiority and inferiority. You see it? And of course we now see that the related doctrines of dominance and submission. In this case, it also refers to repressing the senses. You see my point? To dominate one's own body by suppressing the senses. To make them submit to God's will, which is perfect. You understand? You see how crazy this is? Nonetheless, we've all taken it in. So when you have atonement linked with guilt, you are always going to generate the pathology of a masochist. Always. And this is where this worst dimension of Virgo occurs. Because right away, remember, we have this inner comparison to a standard, an ultimate standard of should-bes. Yes? In which the person can never measure up. They're unobtainable. They're violations of natural law. So the whole cycle of guilt is perpetually recycled, which is defining the inner relationship to the masochist. So this will create three messages that will permeate the Virgo subconscious. These are masochistic in nature. One says, for unknown reasons, I deserve pain, punishment, crises, suffering, denial. Don't know why. Second tape, for my own personal needs to be met, somehow I have to hurt, suffer, sacrifice first. The last one, I'm essentially worthless, while mentally knowing better. When those three tapes combine, it creates other essential tapes, i.e., I don't deserve goodness. See what I'm getting at? And this means when a masochist even manages to create a positive effect in their life, their unconscious will undermine it. I don't deserve goodness. And you can see how all of this is going to generate a core sense of inferiority, which then creates a psychology of never feeling ready or good enough. for the person to do for themselves what they should do when they should do it. Or allowing themselves to act upon ideas that would help them develop themselves. I don't feel ready. I don't feel good enough. Which becomes a causative factor of excuse making after excuse making after excuse making. And why they won't do for themselves what they should do when they should do it. And of course these excuse making will always seem like really rational reasons. They're rooted in the practical reality of their life. Of course they seem rational. And at one level they are. But in reality they're also functional excuses. The way the masochist learns about themselves is through the compulsive creation and formation of crises. Crisis after crisis. Which inevitably leads to analysis. This is why you now know analysis tagged with the word verbal. An analysis linked with crises at some point produces self-knowledge. It's a really painful way to learn. Yes? Variations of this, various variations of masochism, through verbal specifically, can then manifest also as various psychological disorders, as in food disorders. An example, the phenomena called bulimia connects to verbal. And what are you looking at here? You're looking at an individual who, number one, has an incredibly inner negative relationship to themselves. Yes? They're feeling simultaneous to it, because of the Piscean polarity, this great inner existential void, which is more than aloneness that all human beings can feel. It's literally an inner feeling of a void, an existential void, and deep emptiness, which then creates an acute sense of aloneness, a sense of missing pieces. I need to feel a fullness to replace the emptiness. Therein lies stuffing with the food. You see it? It's a wanting to feel full. It's an unconscious need to feel full of spirit. But it's also an unconscious need to feel stimulation in the body. And this is why it can also be directly linked to a displaced sexual function, where now bulimia becomes a de facto sexual event. Think of it. Gorging, feeling totally full and penetrated, throwing up. That's a de facto orgasm. Sensation. Think about it. That make intuitive sense to you? Or this other situation where they just never even eat. You know, and they get down to 80 pounds, 75 pounds, they're walking skeletons. Now you can see the most extreme form of masochism. Their inner relationship is so fundamentally negative at such an intense level. It creates an unconscious motivation to destroy. You see it? These are classic manifestations, all rooted in this pathology called masochism. And see, when the masochistic pathology is in place, it has so many applications, even down to the issue of relationships, because that's clearly going to be the next archetype, Libra. As long as the masochistic mythology is in place, a masochist, whether it's male or female, can only attract one of two types of partners. One partner is literally classified as the emotional wounded bird, who is simultaneously narcissistic, following Leo. Masochist at this point is playing the role of psychologist and nurse, right in a relationship. Might as well go put on a white uniform, Red Cross, name tag, walk around the household. And that type, because of that type will also, in varying degrees of severity, be in denial of X amount of their emotional psychology. Whatever is being denied, of course, gets projected onto the masochist as by way of various forms of abuse. And of course, the masochist is always a problem. So of course, he or she will take in this abuse as if it's true, rarely realizing that it's a projection coming out of the partner based on that which is denied within that partner. And because of the overlay of narcissism, creates a relationship that's fundamentally unequal. Who's doing most of the giving? Who is always putting out the brush fires? And the narcissism combined with the wounds equals the type of partner that will create an image in their brain of who they want the partner to be and expect them to be that way. So that no matter how many confrontations happen, the masochist will never, ever feel understood. Ever. The other type this pathology generates here in America is what we call the silver-tongued devil type. Is the one who in the beginning has all the right words. They know how to seem, they know how to present themselves. Why? All masochists are also naive, gullible, wanting to give the benefit of the doubt. Why? Because they're always doubting themselves. So of course the other must be right, and they must be wrong. And beyond this, masochists in their own way can look beyond a person's ego, and in their own way perceive soul, which then sets in motion the awareness of potential of who the person actually is deep in there. And expecting that somehow that person's going to be what's deep in there. But of course they're not. They can never will be. So now the masochist is making the relationship choice based on potential, what could be, wanting to believe in the presentation. And once the commitment is made, then of course the person's actual agenda becomes revealed. At that point the experience is disillusionment, feeling misled and used. When these two types combine, all masochists will know this type well. It goes a type that's real good at promising change, just enough to re-secure a relationship. And of course they revert to the old patterns. And yet the masochist wants to believe in every new stated intent. Oh, it might happen this time. And it never does. A sad truth, yes? The flip side of this is sadistic, because sadism is also within Virgo. It's also within Pisces. Again, the sadist is motivated by guilt linked with anger. And as a result, the sadist has felt highly victimized by life, just as the masochist has. From a sadistic point of view, other people are the origin of the sadist's problem. They both feel victimized. And because other people are perceived this way, versus a person accepting their responsibility in their own actions, then of course the sadist wants to get back but all those people that have been perceived as the origin of its own problems. An example, a sadist will never be left in a relationship. They always do the leaving first. They need to create the hurt before they themselves get hurt. I mean, most of us that have been in relationships, you know, sometimes we leave, sometimes we're left. And that's normal. So when one of the very first you start dealing with masochists or sadists, if you've got a client in front of you who's telling you, yeah, I've left every relationship I've been in, you better pay attention here. Or conversely, yeah, every relationship I've been in, they leave me. When you hear these words, you better start listening. Understand my point? How many in this room have been in relationships in which you're always the one being left? Me too. I've never left. How many have been in a relationship in which you've always been the leaver?
Only marriage.
You have. You have.
Only marriage.
Marriages.
Others the secret.
I see.
Everyone except the last one.
Well, we need to be doing some honest self-introspection here, don't we? In terms of where things are coming from. So, because these are truly your tip-offs. So we have this issue here, and because as you can now see, this sort of pathology, because both for the sadist and the masochist, they're not good enough. Do you see my point? And again, this has been set in motion via this superstructure called perfect God and the extension of the various concepts that would come out of such a religion. So, if we remember that this is connected to Capricorn, and remembering that Capricorn, Saturn, Tantalus is the archetype of judgment, which is why when you bring it back through Virgo, you have the word discrimination, which is a form of judgment. We have to then remember that the issue is not judgment. Judgment is intrinsic to consciousness, and necessarily so. It's how we learn. Can't learn unless you make a judgment. So the issue is not judgment. The issue is, what is the content we are drawing upon to make judgment? Do you understand that difference? So if that existing content is starting with all these patriarchal thoughts, starting with the perfect God, and this is now internalized, after all, Virgo's a yin archetype, you now see how this becomes incredible self-criticism. Do you see how it's working now? How it's linked and tied together. So the real issue to begin to heal Virgo, you found it. Is to talk to them about the basis of what they're utilizing to make judgments. Because the healing starts with changing what the basis is of what is forming the judgments. This is why there's a natural square to Sagittarius and Gemini from Virgo, as from Pisces. So clearly we're looking at going back to the world of ideas and conceptual thinking. Cosmologies. Yes? This is where the change starts. To have them adjust their cosmology. Which obviously means to get in touch with that which is natural versus that which is not. And if we understand from the point of view of naturalness that this thing we call God, Goddess, is an evolving force who is itself not perfect. We're right then and there has totally altered our cosmology, haven't we? Even through the rippling effect. And that's how this person's going to be judging themselves. Meaning now this allows for an evolution into a much more compassionate judgmental system. You see my point? Which not only extends to themselves, but how they are then judging and criticizing others. You will now find a compassion being expressed versus the, let me be blunt, the nervous, bitchy Virgo that is ever anxious. You understand my point? Nothing's ever right. Bitchy, bitchy, bitchy. Even if there's one crumb of a cookie on the little table here. See my point? So the issue is to change the inner content. This is the real solution. Because once that happens, all kinds of other things simultaneously happen. I.e., until that happens, and one of the delusional thoughts, because remembering that Virgo is also ruled by Mercury, is this delusive thought of never being good enough or ready to do what their higher mind is suggesting that they do. Implying they have to be perfect first. So, and this then creates the inaction. So, and it also sets in motion comparison patterns to external authorities, Capricorn. Authorities they would respect, but this only reinforces the sense of inferiority, not being ready. So the whole way out of this starts again with changing the inner content on which judgment starts. And this must be replaced by the natural God-Goddess. Once that is done, then Virgo suddenly realizes that the path to the famous perfection occurs one step at a time. Action, not thinking. Not yet another book that is partially read. Understand my point? And it is through putting one step in front of the other, the actual doing of something, that the mastery of that something occurs. You can't think it into existence. And then you see along the way, as a person actually begins to accomplish things they truly desire to accomplish, the effect progressively on their own inner self-image, which starts off as intrinsically negative. Do you see what I'm getting at? Is stuff making sense?
I have a question. In case of like, we know that a country has a natal chart, and per se there's a country that has a lot of Virgo energy in the chart, how would that affect the general energy of the people who are born under that country in terms of like the judgment or the masochism, sadism, really?
Collectively critical peoples.
So, it does affect the country's nature, sure. It does affect the general overview under which people are born there.
But see, then the deeper question becomes when you start doing evolutionary astrology, why is this soul decided to say be born in Ecuador, this one in Zaire, this one in Tibet, this one in Canada, this one black, this one white, this one yellow, this one rich, this one poor? How come? This is where life is either considered as random or natural order. If it's natural order, then there's a reason.
Now, what would decide what the truthful birth date of that country would be? Because, per se, in Ecuador, there's been 10,000 years of people living there, yet the birth
Whatever the current constitution is and when that was formed, because that's the one that's applying to the nation now.
Okay, great.
I have a question. A lot of men that I've noticed have, or there's a split with women, like there will be a woman that they put on a pedestal, like she's the perfect woman and blah, 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 blah. And like that's the one they want to marry, whatever, and that they put their, like I've heard guys actually say this, that she's my spiritual ideals or something that I have to live up to. But then, actually it was a guy dated who was like this, but then he would also have to go out with women that...
No, I know what you're talking about.
How does that, I mean,
This works out in...
that's the Virgo archetype, and that's how exactly fits in.
This is I understand exactly what you're getting at. And, which is connected, because the causative factor, what you're describing, is a religious cause, in which the woman in this sort of religious cause, i.e. Angel Mary, is so intrinsically pure, uncontaminated. Yeah, all this stuff. The Madonna. And so, the ideal woman has to be this perfect, uncontaminated thing, which is why they can't even fuck them. That's a contamination issue. Because from this point of view, man gave in to the temptation. This is intrinsically dirty. So then they have to set over here a woman that they're going to consider as non-Madonna-like. Oh, you deserve it. You see the difference? That's where this is coming from. It's a distortion of the religious archetype.
But actually putting their spiritual, it almost sounds like some kind of excuse to me, like saying this woman's perfect and she's my spiritual ideal. Yet I'm still ruling the ends here. You know?
Right. Well, what's amazing is that kind of thing happens a lot more in certain countries than in other countries. For example, it happens a lot more in certain countries than in other countries.
Is that more like a Piscean archetype than a Virgo archetype?
It's a combination, which has now been sexualized. As an example, in Italy it happens a lot. In Sicily happens a lot.
The Victorian era? Wasn't the Victorian era kind of that? Victorian era?
Victorian era is much different than people want to actually deal with. Because everything was, you'd be amazed what on behind the famous closed door. Which is why they could be so prim and proper. There's a perfect balance in a way. There's like a perfect way they'd figured out to balance it. As long as nobody knows. Cheerio. Huh?
The ruling class, the movie with Peter O'Toole.
Yeah, perfect. Perfect. Dangerous beauty, yeah. You got it.
The thought that man created a paternalistic God, the myth of the Garden in Eden, is itself paternalistic, because that would assume that there's more than one God, that we have the ability to dream up new thoughts, new concepts outside of the one God. So the whole idea of the Garden of Eden myth is an outpicturing of our relation to God, and because of that, going before that, it's like, we are just one God. There's one God. We are, of course, a part of it. We all have Pisces in our chart. So as I see this must be part of the great illusion of God to create separateness. And it seems to me that the more man's intelligence evolves, as more his spirituality evolves, the greater the distortions are going to have to be to create that separateness. You follow what I'm saying?
I'll just put it another way, and to simplify what you're trying to describe. A good way to look at it is that the totality of the creation, the totality, in every possible form, dimension, application, in essence, is God knowing itself. and the full dimensions of godness. This is really what the essence is of its own evolution. Yes? That's how we need to understand that point.
In order to create separateness, though, it's got to be very delusive. You know?
It needs to create separateness because it's through the apparent separateness of form that creates a counterpoint reality called self-knowledge. This is why God was not perfect. It can only work towards its own perfection through an evolution called counterpoint. It can only know itself through a counterpoint reality. This is why we have duality. Cause and effect, night, day, male, female. Thought, counter-thought, happy, sad.
And the individual struggle is self-awareness, which leads to God awareness.
Yes, and ultimately, yes.
And is that whole principle reflected in the chart through the power of the polarity, like development?
Yes.
Our own development is almost always through polarity.
Right.
I'm also interested in the way you're bringing in the triads. I just haven't worked with them before, so I'm probably kind of focusing on that. But when you brought up about the silver-tongued devil or the silver-tongued fox or whatever, and brought in, as bringing in the Capricorn aspect of the triad of the judgmental, we've been talking about a lot of male-female things, but within, say, the same gender of patriarchy in this country, just taking in this country, white male, controlling other males of other races, and creating a masochistic response. They can't own themselves in it, like, you know, black or Hispanic men considered shucking and jiving and silver-tongued fox sort of thing. I mean, there's that denigration of not allowing them the wholeness. Am I really off base here?
I'm not quite sure where you're driving at.
Well, just the way that the patriarchy, and maybe I'm misinterpreting this, but in Capricorn, I mean, what white male patriarchy in this country has done to males who are not white, but are of other cultures, that within this state of masochistic, the masochism, using that.
Well, this is also part of God's own evolution, because when you study history, you find out one simple fact, that at various points in time, different skin colors become the dominant race. That itself evolves and changes. This just happens to be now that the white skin is dominant race. Long ago, black skin was dominant race. Before that, yellow skin was dominant race.
I'm just saying it wouldn't have mattered which one is dominant, that one at this point of a patriarchal culture would do that to another. Never mind, I'll just go ahead.
Well, it goes back, to answer your question, you have to understand the cycles behind it. In other words, from a certain point of view, it's necessary at this time that white is dominant race. Just as it was at another time, black was dominant race. But another time, woman was, when we lived naturally, but then it wasn't considered as dominant. It was considered natural. This is our stupid terminology. Do you know my point? That's why, like, when you live in natural cultures, the shaman is co-equal to the corn picker. They're not, one's not considered superior or better than the other. Both are considered to provide a natural function necessary for the benefit of the whole. Just how consciousness is structured, that's the issue.
I got maybe it's a funny question, but is there a natal chart for God Goddess?
No. How could it be limited to such a thing?
I was thinking about what you talked about, how food or eating disorders could be linked to Virgo, and how it somehow could be related to a sense of void and so on. But could it also be a kind of defiance against patriarchy that say, I don't want to sort of be subjected to...
No. No, because that's fine to go ahead and rebel against it, but a natural rebellion will not lead to that kind of distortion. What we're describing by way of these eating disorders are not natural. They themselves are distortions. So why employ a distortion to counteract another distortion? It goes nowhere.
I'm not replying to this. I was thinking about it, and I know quite many women who are suffering from various forms of eating disorders. And I myself have suffered from eating too much. I don't do that anymore, but I think those are kind of...
But there can be so many causative factors. I mean, we're describing the ultimate one. For example, many women who carry unnecessary weight many, would have had a series of, at least one, or probably a series of recent lifetimes, where the men that they were attracting were only interested in their physical bodies. So now the soul knows this, and an unconscious compensation, I'm going to make myself appear not so attractive. So that if the man's interested in me, they really have to be interested in me.
Yes, I understand that.
We have to be able to, there's so many causes for a specific phenomena. Good morning. Let's take a break. Following what we've already developed here with Virgo, you can now see the following, that the sixth house in all of our charts and where the sign Virgo is, and the planet Mercury will all correlate to the times in our life that we become aware of areas that we need to improve upon in our life. The whole issue of self-improvement. Anytime you start thinking in terms, I need to improve this, work on that, is a manifestation of your sixth house. Sixth house. Sign Virgo, Mercury.
I have Mercury and Aries conjunct in my ninth house cusp, making a perfect triangle with Saturn. This is my natal chart. By progression, my natal Saturn has moved maybe 4 or 5 degrees, something like that. And Mercury has moved 120 degrees to make a progress Mercury. It moved all the way down. It's conjuncting my natal Mercury, making a sextile to Venus. So I guess that's one of the reasons I'm here.
Exactly. Exactly right.
Other stuff in there too, but and you really made me squirm when you start talking about Virgo.
Yeah, I know. So another way to look at this is that whatever sign is on your sixth house, and the location of this planetary ruler, its own house and time, the aspects that it's making, where you can infer, because we all are living in patriarchal reality, like it or not, that because of this fact, that it's as if the soul is saying, hey, I'm going to really work on this particular archetype by way of reorientating it in this particular life. And that will correlate with the sign on your sixth house. The location of planetary ruler, aspects being made. Yes? Now another way we need to apply this stuff is, because again, this is one of the initial work archetypes. Again, on behalf of the whole that one lives within. So now you see on one hand the application of personal work, working on oneself. But of course there's also this external work. And because again work is providing a necessary adjustment to ego, it's not the center of its universe. So we want to take care when we start analyzing the sign on the sixth house, because obviously many clients will come to you asking about their work stuff. Are they doing the right work? If not, what is it? How do I realize it? Really common question. I mean, we all have to work, don't we? Most of us. The point there is that the sign on the sixth house, and again the location of its ruler, will start giving you information about what the right work would be for any individual. For example, would it be a tough conclusion or deduction to make if, for example, somebody has areas on their sixth house that probably in the best of all worlds for them, that the best employment scenario would be self-employment. So if you have that as an initial clue, then you start looking at other areas of the chart to figure out what would be relevant by way, or possible by way of self-employment for that person. You see what I'm getting at? Conversely, Libra likes working around people. So if we had Libra in the 6th house, see? We have to make this kind of deductions. But remember, it's only part of the dynamic, but it is the initial part. Because in the end, we have to fit it to 10th house issues and where its ruler is, and Capricorn, and 2nd house. It's a whole dynamic. So, let me ask you a rhetorical question. What do you feel the function is of analysis? What is its archetypical function? Because we all analyze. Why do we analyze?
Find out what needs to be changed. Find out what needs to be changed.
Or worked upon, that's true. That's one function.
To arrive to a conclusion? To arrive to a conclusion?
True.
Doesn't it come from a Latin meaning circle or ring? So you've got to work all your way around the whole thing?
You see, this goes back to the great dilemma of Pisces Virgo. Do we understand the whole from the point of view of inductive logic, i.e. the whole first, which parts reveal themselves, or do we construct the whole out of the parts? Here's the classic Virgo dilemma. It's the way to make an analogy there, and you can even retrofit this to the idea of wanting to be perfect. And the Taoists have a really good story about this problem, and the way they illustrate the story is to compare it to a centipede. Imagine a centipede has like 1,000 legs. Well, this creature is fine as long as it will just keep walking. The whole at once. As soon as it tries to figure out how leg 46 works in the sequence, paralysis. So clearly the moral to perfection, just walk. And the clear answer to understanding the totality is to embrace the inductive logic. If you just try to build it out of the part, you go crazy. Mark knows.
Point out to a client that whatever problems you have, you can be working on instinctively or intuitively without any guidance. And when the guidance comes, it exacerbates your ability to do the analysis. And that also you're getting the client ready for what might be called a graduation when certain aspects come to bear. I feel that's true in my case. And that's happening to me right now. I've been working on self-analysis all my life. And all of a sudden in this room, on this day, I've gotten the answers that I've been looking for all my life. When? And it's in my horoscope.
Right on.
Graduation. You have to get ready for it. I'll get the client ready for it.
Well, a simple way to jumpstart all that is, because often, you know, when I'm dealing with a Virgo type and I'm encouraging them to access their intuition, and because intuition leads to inductive logic, and all too often they'll sit there with this kind of Virgo face and, how do I do that? So somehow trying to analyze how to bring intuition there. It's funny, but the simplest way to deal with that, and for any of us that have any real problem accessing intuition, there's a simple exercise that is in fact a Virgo exercise in which you can jumpstart the activation and final trust in this intuitive process to the point where you'll finally create a dynamic in which even in Virgo, believe it or not, the right brain can lead the left brain. Because we have the natural connection to Sag, the opposition to Pisces. And remember, the solution is always in the polarity and rerouted back to where the original problem was, i.e., in this case, Virgo. You have a flow. And the way to do it is to tell a person or yourself, i.e., to activate intuition. Simply learn how to pose a question about whatever, and learn to leave it in your brain as a question.
Let the brain do it.
Let God do it. And if you simply, as long as you learn to leave it as a question, because again, a secret of God, if somebody is asking something that is totally 100% sincere, God has no choice but to respond. So if you're very sincere, you see how we're activating the Pisces polarity here. So if the person's totally sincere, Sag, and whatever the question may be, at some point there will be an answer that flies into the head of its own volition. It has nothing to do with analyses. It just stands there. Boom. That's intuition. So if the person in effect make a new groove in a record, you know, pretty soon that's where the needle always lands. See what I'm getting at?
Do thoughts, where do they originate? Where does that originate?
Thought? Creation point itself.
It's the source. All thought.
What we're talking about is the nature of intelligence. Intelligence implies thought. Obviously, the ultimate creator of all things has intelligence, or could have been created.
Our thoughts originate with the source.
Yeah, but understand that the human person is in numbers you can't even measure, i.e. in terms of smallness, only one teeny little part of that overall thing called God. And the root issue there is simply called consciousness with intelligence in it, in total. So of course any consciousness that has the capacity to be aware that it is conscious, i.e. self-awareness, will have thought.
So, could you say that you have an 800 number?
Mine's defunct, but or so it seems. So in any case, this is a good thing, a good practical Virgo thing. You can do it to work with your Virgo clients. It will help them feel so much less bound up in themselves. Most Virgo's energies are walking around like a coiled spring, waiting to snap. It's almost impossible for them to find real, natural rest. Typically, they operate from extreme to extreme. They reach a point of absolute exhaustion in which the body has no choice but to sit down. And it goes into that extreme. And one of the causative factors for many is this great inner despair, i.e. this existential void. One of the obvious dynamics of Virgo 6th house, Mercury, is called avoidance, denial. Reason? What does this mean about me if I admit something? It's related to the Capricorn archetype. And when denial starts piling upon denial, then you create an incredibly, through Virgo, an incredibly convoluted reality, which even the most bizarre can seem rational. Think about that. And which even the most bizarre can seem rational. You understand that point? And this can also include finding explanations for something, and the explanation is so apparently rational, and yet it's just another avoidance. Just how convoluted and, in quotes, complicated to the left brain, which is literally like a spider web, that Virgo can create. Then you have this obvious cliche link with Virgo. What's it called? Can't see the forest or the trees or something. This is the outcome. How many of your Virgo types in this room recognize what I'm describing? Although.
These are the ones that can look at that section too, like if a tree falls, you should.
Yeah, right. The answer is yes. Doesn't matter if the humans there or not.
Is this a phenomena of when Virgo goes inert, or when they are going into avoidance, that these convoluted thoughts and ideas start spinning on them?
Yes. The cause is avoidance or denial. And that is then the consequence. And see, this is why we have this Piscean polarity. The whole message of the Pisces polarity in this context, simplify. Virgo's delusion is to tend to think whatever the answers may be or to their questions. There's some root, because of this convoluted reality created, must be complex answers. These highfalutin, abstract, convoluted thoughts coming together. And in all cases, the answers that they're looking for, the cause of something, is simple. Much more basic than they've ever realized. And when they start to get onto that one, and they make that cumulative, then you are healing Virgo. And you're creating patience within themselves, gentleness, slowing down, self-acceptance. But see, one of the great questions Virgo needs to learn to ask, given Pisces polarity, is the question, why have I needed to create this, or this, or this? Versus, why is this happening to me? The whole need here is to purge any element of victimization. As long as that is sustained, there is no hope of changing anything about Virgo. No hope. Hope in astrology is Pisces. So effectively they're removing all hope, which is only now going to intensify despair. It just becomes an unending loop this way. And that's why the solution point, why have I needed to create this? We see the connection back through Capricorn. Try it. Learning to, that's the message for all of us in Capricorn. Learning to accept the responsibility in our own actions. There are no victims. Literally. That's not just things appear to be, but in terms of ultimately being true, of course not. I mean, if anybody knows about, I mean, I could easily choose to be a victim in this life, given this life. But, you know, even, I've never held my mother responsible for what she did. Because I realized early on why I needed to create this for myself.
Do you need to know the cause in order to have a healing?
The cause of
any distorted thinking? I mean, do you need to know, I mean, do you need...
Yes, in Virgo, because, again, Virgo's Mercury ruled.
So if it was in a past life, you need to access that?
Not necessarily, because if it is something that's not resolved from a prior life, being brought forward into the current life, you're going to be able to find current circumstances that mirror the original problem. So you can look at that original problem through the current circumstance, as long as you know what it is. But you can use your current circumstances and work your way backwards, so to speak. That's a good way for Virgo to do it.
So the wound precedes the injury?
Yes. And see, one of the ways I always like to work with Virgo clients is, I always like, generally for the ones who are most resistant, I try to work through reverse logic. So what if you don't do this? That tends to catch their attention. Because then they see the deepening crisis. Uh-oh. attempts to motivate.
Part of the experience I just had, one of the real strong lessons was that I got into deeper trouble through not doing than I did through doing the wrong thing.
Right.
It was when I was doing the Pisces thing, of basically doing nothing and just taking enough drugs so I didn't feel my pain, that led me to the experience of looking at how far into hell I was. That experience was given to me. And it wasn't until that happened that I had the motivation to just catch hold of even one moment to move in the other direction or to take action. It led to that level of extremity.
So, for those that get into counseling astrology, remember this little trick when you start working with Virgo types. They keep finding excuses of why they're not going to do. The most favorite word in a Virgo vocabulary, the word is but. Pero. Yeah.
I've been studying astrology for about 30 years. And for 30 years I've been putting off becoming a professional astrologer. I'm always a Virgo in the second house. And now that you're being so hard on Virgo, I want to tell you.
I'm being compassionate here with Virgos. You were right in waiting.
Right, I was. Now, after I finish the second set, I'll be ready.
Okay.
I want to point out that I was right all those years that I was Virgo was right again.
Okay. Fine.
There's a Virgo guy who told me, he said, motion creates emotion. Like motion creates emotion. And I remember when my grandmother died, who was a Virgo, and I was like, and I just started cleaning my whole house.
Right.
But I wasn't thinking about anything.
That goes back to the story of the centipede. You could either went in that room and just sat out.